On the night she thought would end in warmth after a family dinner, Regina, a 70-year-old widow, was left standing alone in the dim parking lot of Golden Palm restaurant. The laughter of other guests echoed faintly as cars pulled away, but the vehicle that carried her son-in-law, Patrick, had already sped off, leaving her with nothing but the cold night air. To anyone watching, Regina appeared like a fragile old woman, her grey shawl draped carefully over her shoulders, her handbag clutched against her chest. Yet beneath that simple appearance lived decades of strength, a woman who had quietly built a fortune while the world dismissed her as ordinary. That night, betrayal had a face, and its name was Patrick. Regina shifted her weight and took a slow breath, realizing Patrick had not simply forgotten her. No. He had chosen this humiliation, a calculated move to remind her she was powerless. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. In his mind, she was just an old woman who lived simply, an obstacle to be pushed aside so he could tighten his grip on Lydia, her only daughter. He did not know that Regina had been watching, quietly studying his patterns of control, his smooth words, and his careful manipulation of Lydia's life. Tonight's abandonment was meant to break her spirit. Instead, it would ignite a fire he never saw coming. As Regina steadied herself under the flickering streetlight, a soft voice called out, "Mama, are you all right?" Clara, a young woman in her early 30s with warm brown eyes and a headscarf loosely tied around her hair, had noticed her standing alone. She had been waiting for a taxi but could not ignore the sight of an elderly woman left stranded. Regina hesitated for a moment, her pride urging her to say nothing, but something in Clara's kindness disarmed her. She nodded slowly, and that single nod would change everything. From that night onward, Clara would become more than a stranger. She would be a loyal ally in the battle that was about to unfold. In the quiet days that followed, Regina pieced together the cruel puzzle. Patrick's control over Lydia was deeper than she had admitted. He monitored her bank accounts, dictated her spending, and even made her doubt her own decisions. He had carefully painted Regina as a burden, convincing Lydia that her mother's advice was outdated. But Patrick did not know the truth. Behind Regina's simple home and modest clothing lay Sunwave Holdings, a business empire she had built with discipline and wisdom over 5 decades. For years, she had chosen silence and privacy. Now, that silence would become her sharpest weapon. Regina moved quickly but quietly. She called Martin, her longtime lawyer, whose loyalty had never wavered. She summoned Olivia, her trusted financial advisor, who understood the value of secrecy in protecting wealth. And finally, she reached out to Samuel, a private investigator known for exposing liars who lived double lives. Together, they formed a circle of trust around her, each one bound by respect for her wisdom and determination. What Patrick thought was a night of dominance would soon unravel into his downfall. Regina had been underestimated for far too long, and now it was Patrick's turn to learn the cost of mistaking humility for weakness. While Regina gathered her circle of trust, Patrick strutted through life convinced of his own cleverness. He bragged at family gatherings, reminded Lydia of how fortunate she was to have him, and boasted about his supposed business skills to friends. But Regina's private investigator, Samuel, was already tracing his shadow. Within a week, Samuel uncovered documents that revealed debts hidden behind layers of lies, unpaid loans that stretched back 17 years, and schemes where Patrick had siphoned money from former partners. Worse still, Samuel found whispers of something darker, rumors that Patrick had once insured a woman's life only for her to meet a suspicious end. The evidence was there, scattered like ashes, waiting for Regina to bring it together into a raging fire. Lydia, meanwhile, was blind to the storm forming around her. Years of manipulation had left her uncertain, always second-guessing herself, believing Patrick's version of reality. When Regina gently suggested that she check her own bank statements, Lydia waved it off, insisting, "Mama, Patrick knows what he's doing." Regina's heart ached, but she did not push. She knew the chains of emotional and financial abuse could not be broken in a single day. Instead, she would let the truth speak louder than her words. Behind closed doors, she instructed Olivia to safeguard her holdings, sealing her assets in a way Patrick could never touch. For every step Patrick thought he was ahead, Regina was 3 steps further. Clara, the young woman from the restaurant parking lot, soon became more than just a friendly face. She worked at Citibank as a mid-level officer and understood how money trails told stories people tried to hide. With Regina's quiet blessing, Clara dug through transaction records linked to Patrick's businesses. What she found was chilling. Withdrawals made late at night, transfers to offshore accounts, and strange payments connected to a man already under investigation for fraud. Clara's hands trembled as she presented the papers to Regina. "Mama," she whispered, "this is more than greed. This is dangerous." Regina placed a steady hand on hers and replied softly, "My child, we will not fear him. We will expose him." The pieces were falling into place, but Regina knew exposure required precision. She could not simply confront Patrick. Men like him thrived on twisting the truth and turning victims against their protectors. So she set her plan with care. Samuel continued tracking his past victims. Martin prepared legal documents to ensure Lydia would be safe the moment evidence surfaced. Olivia structured financial barriers so Patrick could not touch Regina's empire. And Clara quietly fed information from Citibank, connecting every stolen dollar to Patrick's hand. Regina moved through these days with the calm of a hunter, her silence sharper than any spear. Patrick believed he was the lion in the room, but soon he would discover he had been the prey all along. The breakthrough came on a humid Friday morning when Samuel returned with a file thick enough to crush Patrick's lies forever. Inside were signed agreements showing Patrick had forged Lydia's signature to take loans in her name, falsified documents to secure fake investments, and even filed paperwork for a life insurance policy worth $2 million, naming himself as the beneficiary of Lydia's life. Regina's breath caught as she flipped through the pages, but her eyes did not show fear. Instead, they burned with resolve. The game had changed. This was no longer about humiliation in a restaurant parking lot. It was about saving her daughter's life. And Regina, the woman Patrick thought was powerless, was now holding the blade of truth in her hands. Patrick noticed changes he could not explain. Lydia, once timid, began asking questions about their joint accounts. Citibank suddenly flagged certain transactions, freezing access to money he had counted on. Even at family dinners, he felt Regina's eyes on him. Calm, unreadable, like the gaze of someone who knew more than she was saying. His arrogance told him she was too old to matter, yet a seed of unease grew in his chest. Meanwhile, Regina moved with serenity. She smiled, served food, and asked about his day, never revealing the storm she was preparing. Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. One evening, Patrick confronted Lydia. "Why are you suddenly questioning me? Don't you trust your husband?" His voice carried the sharpness of a blade. Lydia shrank at first, then remembered her mother's gentle words. "My child, a wise woman always knows the truth in her heart, even if her lips are silent." Gathering courage, she said, "I just want to understand our finances better." Patrick forced a smile, but inside he seethed. To him, Lydia's questions were not hers. They were Regina's poison. His pride swore he would teach them both a lesson. But pride blinds even the cleverest hunter, and Patrick was walking deeper into the trap. Samuel's investigation spread further, reaching old associates who had once trusted Patrick. One by one, their stories painted the same picture: broken promises, stolen money, and emotional wreckage. A woman in East Bay Town described how Patrick had drained her savings in 2010. Another man recalled how Patrick had promised investments that vanished overnight. Each testimony added weight to Regina's file, turning suspicion into undeniable proof. Martin, the lawyer, crafted airtight cases for fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. "Mama Regina," he said with respect, "when this storm breaks, he will not escape. But you must be ready. For men like him, cornered animals can be the most dangerous." Patrick's cruelty was not only financial, it was emotional. He began to isolate Lydia more, demanding she cut back her visits to Regina's house. "Your mother is meddling too much," he sneered one night. But Lydia resisted quietly. She found excuses to see her mother, her heart slowly learning to trust again. In Regina's living room, lit by soft lanterns, Lydia would sit and weep as her mother held her hand. "Daughter," Regina whispered, "you are not weak. You are simply healing from years of lies. But soon you will see clearly." Those evenings planted seeds of courage in Lydia's spirit, preparing her for the truth that was about to be revealed. Clara, the young banker, played her role with grace. At work, she noticed new attempts by Patrick to move large sums into shadow accounts. She flagged each one, forwarding the reports to Regina's circle. But Clara also knew she was treading dangerous ground. "Mama," she said during a late-night meeting in Regina's study, "if he discovers I'm helping you, it could cost me my job." Regina placed her wrinkled hand on Clara's and replied, "Child, the risk you take is the price of justice. And justice never forgets those who stand for truth." Clara's eyes glistened with resolve. She would not falter. Patrick, sensing the walls closing in, grew reckless. He cornered Lydia one night in their home and shouted, "Do you think your mother can save you? She has nothing. I am everything you need." His voice thundered through the rooms, but Lydia did not break. She remembered Clara's words about the bank transactions, remembered her mother's calm confidence, and whispered, "I don't believe you anymore." Patrick's rage boiled, but Regina had already anticipated this moment. Samuel had placed discreet recording devices in Lydia's home, capturing every threatening word. Patrick thought he was tightening control, but in truth, he was digging his own grave. Regina's team prepared their final move. Martin coordinated with the authorities, ensuring every piece of evidence was ready. Olivia secured Lydia's accounts, cutting Patrick off from further access. Samuel delivered the recordings and testimonies, building an iron wall of proof. The day of confrontation was drawing near. But Regina did not rush. She moved like the river, calm on the surface, unstoppable in its flow. She prayed silently at dawn, asking for strength not just for herself but for Lydia, who would soon see the mask ripped off the man she had once called husband. Then came a chilling revelation. Samuel uncovered that Patrick had secretly purchased a life insurance policy worth $2 million in Lydia's name. The beneficiary, himself. Worse still, he had recently searched for ways to increase the payout by claiming accidental death. Regina's chest tightened as Samuel explained, but her resolve only deepened. This was no longer about money. It was about saving her daughter's life. "We cannot wait any longer," she said firmly. "The time has come." Her voice carried the weight of a mother who had been underestimated for too long, and a warrior ready for battle. On a Monday morning heavy with clouds, Regina sat in her lawyer's office as Martin submitted the case file to the police. Within hours, officers launched an investigation, freezing Patrick's accounts and placing him under surveillance. Patrick, unaware, went about his day, shouting at workers, meeting shady associates, and boasting of his power. But for the first time, cracks appeared. His card was declined at a restaurant. A business partner cancelled a deal without explanation. Confusion gave way to paranoia, and paranoia to fear. He was losing control, though he did not yet know who was behind it. The storm finally broke when uniformed officers arrived at Patrick's office later that week. His arrogance melted into disbelief as they read the charges: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and attempted murder. Cameras clicked, bystanders whispered, and his once loyal workers looked away in shame. As he was led out in handcuffs, his eyes searched the crowd, and there, standing tall in a simple wrapper and headscarf, was Regina. She said nothing, but her gaze spoke volumes. For years, he had believed she was powerless. Tonight he saw the truth. Regina was not a victim. She was the architect of his downfall. The arrest was only the beginning. Patrick's lawyers rushed to paint him as a misunderstood businessman, claiming Regina had orchestrated a witch hunt out of jealousy. Newspapers ran headlines, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But Regina was prepared. With Martin by her side, she released carefully chosen documents, bank records, signed forgeries, and testimonies from past victims. The evidence spoke louder than rumors. The court agreed to hold Patrick without bail, citing the severity of the charges. For the first time, Patrick sat alone in a cold cell, stripped of his expensive suits, his voice unheard, his power crumbling like sand in the rain. Lydia, however, wrestled with emotions more complex than victory. At night, she wept for the years lost, the trust betrayed, the love that had been nothing more than manipulation. Regina sat by her bedside, her hand gently stroking her daughter's hair. "My child," she whispered, "tears cleanse the soul, but strength rebuilds it. You will not remain broken." Lydia nodded through the tears, realizing that her mother's quiet life had always been a shield, not weakness. Slowly, courage began to return to her heart, like dawn breaking after a long storm. Clara, the young banker who had once offered kindness in a parking lot, now stood as one of Regina's strongest allies. She testified bravely before investigators, presenting records that traced every stolen dollar back to Patrick. Her words were steady, her evidence undeniable. Afterward, she admitted to Regina, "Mama, I was afraid at first, but helping you has shown me something. That silence only feeds evil." Regina smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Child, you have discovered wisdom many never learn in a lifetime." Their bond, born from a single act of kindness, had grown into a partnership rooted in justice. In court, Patrick tried to regain control. He flashed arrogant smiles, whispered insults toward Regina, and even attempted to charm the judge with smooth words. But every time he spoke, another piece of evidence silenced him. Martin presented recordings of his verbal threats to Lydia. Samuel provided sworn testimonies from past victims. Olivia displayed financial structures that proved how he attempted to steal from both wife and mother-in-law. Each revelation tightened the rope around his lies until even the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Patrick, who once thought himself untouchable, now looked like a desperate man cornered by truth. Outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. Families whispered about the dangers of financial abuse. Women gathered in small circles to share their own struggles, inspired by Regina's courage. Radio stations debated the case, warning listeners that predators often hide behind charm and false success. Regina never sought fame, but her story became a mirror for many, reflecting the hidden chains of control in homes across the city. Standing before cameras once, she simply said, "Silence protects abusers. But truth saves lives." Those words rippled through communities, igniting conversations long buried in shame. Lydia, slowly healing, began to rediscover herself. She enrolled in evening classes at City University, studying social work. "Mama," she said one evening, "I want to help women like me, those who do not even know they are being controlled." Regina's heart swelled with pride. "Daughter," she replied, "pain can either destroy us or teach us. Choose to let it teach." Lydia nodded, her eyes shining with a determination that had been buried for years. The chains Patrick had wrapped around her spirit were breaking, replaced by a fire of purpose. Patrick's trial dragged on for weeks, each day peeling back layers of deceit. One morning, the prosecutor revealed the life insurance policy, Patrick's plan to profit from Lydia's death. Gasps filled the courtroom. Patrick's face drained of color as the jury stared at him in horror. Lydia broke down in tears, clutching her mother's hand. Regina, however, remained composed. Her silence thundered louder than Patrick's denials. She had lived long enough to see predators fall by their own hands, and now she was watching it unfold in real time. Justice was not swift, but it was certain. Behind bars, Patrick's arrogance collapsed into bitterness. He blamed Regina for his downfall, cursed Lydia for betrayal, and accused everyone of conspiring against him. But in truth, he had conspired only against himself. His greed, his lies, and his cruelty had woven the very net that now held him captive. In his cell, he replayed every step, every forged signature, every cruel word, realizing too late that he had underestimated the wrong woman. Regina had worn humility like armor, and her silence had been his undoing. The verdict came on a bright morning when the courtroom was packed with spectators. The judge's voice rang clear: guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted murder. Patrick was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Gasps filled the room, but Regina simply closed her eyes and whispered, "It is finished." Lydia clung to her mother, tears of relief streaming down her face. Clara smiled from the gallery, while Martin, Olivia, and Samuel exchanged quiet nods. Justice had been served, not only for Regina and Lydia, but for every unseen victim Patrick had ever harmed. That evening, Regina sat on her veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Lydia sat beside her, her head resting gently on her mother's shoulder. "Mama," she whispered, "I thought I was broken. But now I see. Your strength was always waiting for me to borrow." Regina smiled, her wrinkled hand stroking Lydia's hair. "Daughter, we do not break. We bend, we learn, and we rise again." In that quiet moment, as birds returned to their nests, mother and daughter felt the weight of the past lift. The pain had been real, but so was their victory. And from that victory, a new purpose was about to be born. The weeks after Patrick's sentencing brought peace to Regina's home. For the first time in years, Lydia slept without fear of what tomorrow might hold. She spent mornings at City University, afternoons volunteering at Unity Hospital, and evenings learning how to manage her own finances. Clara visited often, bringing laughter and light into their home, while Martin, Olivia, and Samuel checked in to ensure all legal matters were settled. Regina, once silent and hidden, now spoke freely at women's gatherings, telling her story not with bitterness but with wisdom. She reminded them that abuse was not always marked by bruises. It could be hidden in bank statements, in whispered lies, and in the silence of control. Her voice carried the weight of experience, and women listened. Inspired by her mother's resilience, Lydia took a bold step. She founded the Rising Dawn Foundation, dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse and rebuild their independence. With Clara as the financial director and Olivia as an advisor, the foundation quickly grew. They offered workshops on budgeting, legal aid, and safe housing. Within months, women across the city found courage to leave abusive partners, empowered by Lydia's story. At the launch ceremony, Lydia stood before hundreds and declared, "I was once blind, but truth opened my eyes. No woman should suffer in silence. With knowledge, with support, we can rise again." The audience erupted in applause, and Regina, seated in the front row, felt her heart swell with pride. Patrick, locked away in Ironwood prison, heard whispers of the Rising Dawn Foundation. Each mention of it was a dagger to his pride. The man who had tried to destroy Lydia now watched helplessly as she became a leader, a symbol of strength he could never break. His rage turned to bitterness, but bitterness brought him no freedom. He had gambled on deceit, and the debt he owed was now measured in decades. Regina never visited him, never wasted a word on the man who had once tried to make her invisible. Silence remained her sharpest answer, a silence more powerful than any curse. As time passed, Regina began using her company, Sunwave Holdings, to support Lydia's foundation. She quietly funded scholarships for young women, provided seed money for survivors to start small businesses, and ensured that the foundation would never lack resources. But she did all this without fanfare. "True power," she told Lydia, "does not shout. It builds, it protects, and it heals." Journalists tried to uncover how she managed her wealth, but Regina always smiled and replied, "I live simply, and that is enough." In truth, she was teaching her daughter the same lesson she had lived by. Privacy is strength, and wealth, when used wisely, can change the world. On a cool evening 2 years later, Regina sat again on her veranda, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops of the city. Beside her, Lydia laughed as children from the foundation played in the courtyard, their voices carrying joy into the air. Clara joined them with fresh bread, while Martin, Olivia, and Samuel stopped by to share stories of the week. Regina closed her eyes, letting the sound of laughter wash over her. Betrayal had once left her in a dark parking lot, but from that moment had risen a legacy of strength, justice, and renewal. Opening her eyes, she whispered, "We turned pain into purpose. And that, my daughter, is victory." With that, the story of Regina and Lydia closed. Not as victims, but as builders of a future where silence would never again hide abuse, and where truth would always rise like the dawn.